Hello and welcome to another Nimble video tutorial. In this video tutorial, I've got a lot to cover. Made some enhancements to my version 4.1 nimbleJS library. Added the shorthand syntax to the runtime and even optimized it a little bit. But before we get into that, let's continue looking at the full stack implementation that I added for this IDE. Today we're going to continue looking at this design by focusing on the plugins module. The purpose of this module is the gateway to all the additional enhancements that you could add to your Node.js server. The plugins handler is the tool responsible or module responsible for registering and detecting plugins that you copy into a file folder and then initializing them for your server. If you want to, you can disable them and it will keep track of all the users that have access to each module and allow you to add and remove users from plugins as well as post messages between them. I wanted to highlight this because this is probably the linchpin module that's going to make this full stack implementation able to dynamically grow. Like the builder design pattern, interfaces are important, and designing a very robust interface at this juncture will allow the server to grow in the future and not have any worries about conflicts or bad design. Just wanted to highlight the plugins module from my Node.js full stack implementation. Now that we've got all the back-end stuff out of the way, let's talk about front-end goodies. I found an article on the web, kind of old article, about a year old, talking about speeding up Angularjs digest cycle. If there are any Angular developers out there, you probably have encountered that limit where if you have about 2,000 elements in the DOM, Angular begins to slow down and you begin to see a big performance problem with the digest cycle. I think this was probably the final straw, the thing that made me avoid using Angular, and really I have no intent on going back to using that framework because it's so poorly written with respect to the digest cycle. When I started developing Nimble, performance was one of the most important factors for the quality, accuracy, and performance. And just to give you an idea about the difference between Angular and most of the popular frameworks, as opposed to how Nimble was designed, just the IDE alone. Once you start this IDE, you're already running 2,476 elements. All the items that we have here, the editor, you're running a full syntax highlighting editor when you run CodeMirror, and you're pushing close to 3,000 elements that's being managed by Nimble. That being said, you're now going to start building your actual application using this JavaScript IDE. So imagine that this would probably get up to a good 5, 6, 7,000 elements being managed and then built to create your web app. And I suspect that Nimble will not skip a beat. Just something to consider when you talk about frameworks and what's popular as opposed to what's designed well. I didn't design Nimble to be popular. I designed it to be fast and accurate. Moving right along, let's talk about some of the features that I added. I did spend some time refactoring small pieces of the code to see if I could optimize some things and make it a little bit lighter. I think I trimmed out about 30K of code unminified. Once you minify it, it only reduced it about 13 to 14K. But that gave me just enough space so that I could include the shorthand syntax. If you visit my website, I mentioned the original syntax is kind of VB-like. You have forms in all caps, kernel, desktop, and these are the objects or the singletons that you use to manipulate everything Nimble related. All the methods are piggybacked off of that syntax. So I wrote a nice routine to convert all of those commands and match them with a more JavaScript friendly syntax, which is all lowercase and $F for forms, D for desktop, $K for kernel. But all the commands are still the same. So if we, just for example, we load form 1 here. I can still minimize form 1 with the shorthand syntax as well as with the old syntax. I wanted to just highlight that because sometimes that more verbose syntax is a turnoff for JavaScript developers, so a shorthand might be a little bit more appealing. Move right along, let's talk about web components. When you're using a visual IDE such as Nimble, or you're building a visual IDE such as Nimble, you have to think about manipulating CSS differently. For example, a widget, a web control, would have a full transparent background, but when you make it fully transparent, you won't necessarily be able to see it. So Nimble has to be able to highlight something that's fully transparent with a dotted border, just so that it's visual and you know where it is on the screen. You can lay out your component on the surface. In this case, it's just going to be like a name field. You would set the label and give it probably the name caption, and set this text box and give it the name value. So that way, if you use this widget to take someone's first name, it would be first name dot caption to set the caption, and first name dot value to put data into the text box. Once the component is finished, you can bring in any type of validation tool. Parsley, I'm going to be including some as components or libraries that you can choose to validate the data in the text box, and all that is packaged within the widget. You run a widget build on this guy, and what you'll notice is going to take a snapshot at the time you save the file or save the dialog. The snapshot is of course used for any of these mouse over previews, but it also saves the a transparent background PNG file for when the widget is dragged onto a dialog. And I wanted to give you a look at this because this is just an image representation of the component. The same way I use image representations for any of the custom third-party libraries that I bring in. These images for these components I had to manually create, but I wanted to let Nimble kind of auto create this for you for simplicity, so that's just ready for you to use. I dragged a few of these components onto this dialog, set some docking for a few just to test it to make sure it works, and we're gonna build this thing now. So you can just see a custom component built and used within the Nimble framework. Once the component or this web app is built, you click on it and you see all the instances of these web components brought directly into the dialog. The sizing for the web component works the same. You'll notice that it sizes each component differently. I have this particular component set with the right docking feature on, but just as you would expect any web component to behave. It's going to run really nice. And you'll notice there's really no performance hit when you package it as a component, as opposed to just manually dragging each element on the dialog individually. As I said, you can include more libraries or make your components as complicated as you want, but the one thing Nimble does not support is putting we'll call a widget within a widget. It only has one level of being able to combine these, and that's using a widget on a dialog. You cannot build widgets within widgets or nest your dependencies that way. Just wanted to give you a good look at what I've been working on. Nimble 4.1, some of the prototype stuff I've been adding to the runtime. Talk about performance, and let you see this thing is still moving forward. Thank you for watching.